Hello, beautiful people. Please let me know if my audio and video are good. I have some fan noise coming off of this computer. Doesn't matter that I got the fastest processor possible. Whenever I stream, the fan seems to go apeshit. So do let me know if the audio and video are good. That would be very, very helpful for me. Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people, thank you for joining me this evening. I will be doing a review, an in-progress review of the strategy series in order to keep you all apprised of what's happening, share some insights, some observations from what's happened thus far. And then at the end of it, I will be taking questions, but they will be related to the strategy session to keep this thing focused. Okay, good. Zedez is in the house, and I'm hearing that the audio and video are good. I hope that remains the case. I see a number of folks here. King Salmon Fish, hello, sir. Edward the Pale, thank you all for joining, as well as moderators like Mr. Ixme. Of course, Zedez in the house too. So before I get started, I will go over the basic, the boilerplate stuff. Please follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as a safer space. You can do that on BitChute. You can do that on Odyssey. You can follow me on Telegram. You can follow me on Gab, and there is Twitter. Now, my lifespan on Twitter, I don't know how long that's going to run. Likewise, I really don't know how things are going to go on YouTube, as crazy as everything is these days. So there are really two alternative platforms that I want to emphasize. BitChute's good. I have more followers over there than anywhere else other than YouTube, although I think I have more on Twitter now. But BitChute seems to be having some trouble. I have not gained any subscribers there for a long time. And in fact, very slowly, they're beginning to disappear. I think they're being throttled to a considerable extent. Gab, likewise, just doesn't seem to grow. And for whatever reason, the interactions over there are not, I don't know. I wanted Gab to do well. Perhaps it will in future. Anyway, a roundabout way of saying that you should follow me on Odyssey, which seems to be an excellent choice for video content. There's streaming that's possible and the rest. I haven't started using it in that respect yet, but it looks very, very good. Please do follow me on Odyssey as well as BitChute. In terms of the Twitter-ish platforms, Telegram is really the one that seems to be the most alive and to have the most going on. So Telegram and Odyssey for sure, BitChute, Twitter, Gab as well. Also, some of you, the more observant of you, should have seen by now that a whole bunch of content has been removed from the YouTube channel. I got a warning sometime back, a couple weeks back, about some content being, bad, evil, nasty, fill in the blank, whatever it is. So I just went back through and pulled anything that could be questionable. All of that stuff is still there, including a large number of discussions with my very dear friend Tim. You can find that stuff on Odyssey and on BitChute. So again, another very good reason to follow me on BitChute, definitely Odyssey. I also am wishing the best for Tim. Still haven't talked to him yet since the last time, but I do hope he is getting better. I know it's been a bear for him. So anyway, that's the opening material. Let me just check the chat here, make sure that there's nobody saying suddenly the audio dropped out or anything. El Vaquero 555 is in the house. I hope he's smoking some fine tobacco. All right. John Ski too. It's a rather a regular gathering of vultures now. So I will get to the point on this. Again, we're going to do a review in this strategy session number 4 of the previous 3. Whenever I work with a client, what we do is we work for a while and then we all get together and put our heads together and we think, well, what did we learn? What have we seen? How are we doing with all of this? Is everyone tracking together and the rest? So this is going to be a sort of in progress session of that sort. Part of the reason that I want to review the process at this point is to emphasize that this is a work in progress. It's going to take some time. Usually when creators post video, they're sharing something that they have already thought through. In this case, the clips are all about thinking towards something, and that process takes a while. So I'm going to do this review of where we are in order to help people maintain a sense of the bigger picture. So, one of the things that they say in public speaking is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. In this case, I'm going to add the phase of tell them what you're telling them, again, to make sure that everybody is tracking with me. So this is what I'm aiming to do here is not an easy process. I think really it's going to be a minority of people who follow it fully. That's no slight on anyone, but most people haven't been involved in weird seeking for the kernel of a message over time through an iterative process where you try to drill down, as they like to say, and figure out what the essential points are. And I don't know really how many people are involved in strategy, whether it be surrounding communications, marketing, branding, and the rest. So, not everybody's going to get it. And that's part of why I am trying to err on the side of overdoing it based on work with clients, to give you guys some, I guess, a little slice of my professional background. Let me just cover the client's name here. This book is the product of a good bit of work that I did in 2013. And it has all sorts of interesting stuff in it from all the different places we went and all the different things we looked at. And what was it? 7 cities in 6 countries. It was for a client that produced, let's say, sports products. And they wanted to get into the realm of exercise, athleticism, working out, health, fitness. And we had to go and look at what issues were most important. And this client had people in the past come and tell them that, part of why people exercise is to deal with stress, but they had sort of filed it away in this corner. They figured it wasn't very important. There were a few people who, wanted to work out in order to, cut down on their cortisol or whatever and reduce their stress, but it wasn't a major thing. It was like some minor aspect of their segmentation. Segmentation, for those who are not familiar with it, being breaking out the audience into its different groups, depending on how you want to reach each of those groups. So they'll be considered segments for marketing purposes. But they didn't think it was important. So after 7 cities and 6 countries, looking at it, thinking about it, trying to understand what the core of all of this was, I recognized that every single one of the activities that people were involved in could be mapped onto stress responses, specifically fight, freeze, and flight. I mean, running, for example, is one of the most popular fitness activities out there. And there are many things to recommend it. All you have to do is bring along a pair of shoes. You can do it almost anywhere. But you had fight and the aggression of weightlifting or, MMA or, people shouting at you to do this or do that. You also had the idea of freeze. People forget that freeze is one of the reactions as a response to stress. And so you have all sorts of things with like meditation and yoga, trying to find a sense of inner equilibrium, not to be pushed or moved. Anyway, I bring all of this up because we're looking at a way to reach people what the core thing is that is on offer, that the person who's buying products related to sports, how do I say this? What the core thing on offer for them is that really matters, whether they're fully conscious of it or not. And I put all that together and watched it go right over the head of people who had just paid me and my team roughly in the neighborhood of $500,000 to share the insights. And they didn't want to listen. It just went right over their heads. They're like, well, what, sell whatever. It just didn't click. I bring this up because that's what I meant when I said before that a lot of people won't follow this. But for some few, they will, and they will see the value of insights, for example, like the one I just shared, that all the fitness behavior, particularly in our overcrowded, overstressed, no time available, constantly under pressure environment, that they come down to, all the fitness stuff comes down to stress responses. It's an enormously valuable insight. So that's the kind of thing that we're after. If anybody else needs help in getting their heads around what all of this is about that I'm talking about. You can also look at the business of Gramsci and Marcuse, and the way in which the socialists, the Marxists, and the rest had been failing in what they were trying to do. And suddenly Gramsci comes along and points out that, culture itself must first be subverted. It's not enough, for example, to just take over the instruments of power. There's value in that too, but when they had done it in the past, it didn't stick. Or look at Marcuse's idea of framing utopia as something that is present now, but that simply has all of these layers of crap over it, these tyrannical impositions of the patriarchy or capitalism, and however they want to construe it. And the idea is that the utopia is present, but it needs to be lifted away and thereby revealed. And so the idea of revolution was replaced with the idea of liberation. You get the long march through the institutions. You get the idea of weaponizing minority populations along race lines rather than driving wedges in at the class interstices. And bang, they're off to the races. So, if you want to see the power of something that's been properly thought through, look at the highly successful and the shockingly widespread subversion that you see around you. I guess in summary, this is important, and only a fool would bring a knife to a thought fight. So let's go back over what we have seen sort of unfold with the last 3 strategy episodes. So I want to, share these with you, hopefully get everybody up to speed with them, and, keep it fresh in your mind. Again, tell you what I'm telling you as a part of that whole riff of tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. So the first clip was about setting the stage, justifying the exercise. You can go back and check it out if you haven't. I'd recommend it. This series is going to be most valuable for people who are willing to watch the entire thing, pay attention to it as it's happening, share your thoughts. There is even a possibility of setting up some sort of a little server for people to come in and participate with the thinking and the rest of the process around these different episodes, where I'll be speaking to different guests and the rest. So the point is that we need communication strategy, and it needs to be done. And that's what I covered in episode 1. There are a number of points with that. Number 1, if we don't ask the right questions, we'll never arrive at answers that matter. Number 2, we need to cooperate and we need to collaborate. And that is easiest when everybody has a clear idea about what's on offer. What are we doing? What are the goals? What is the strategy? And how do we communicate it? Another one is that public opinion matters. Even if you're pursuing a strategy of elite conversion, how the public takes it, particularly if you're not already in possession, the reins of power, if you're not already holding the ring of Mordor, then this whole idea of public opinion becomes much, much more important. And it should be apparent to everyone why it is and how it is that communication strategy bears on that. Another point that I raised at that time is that we have a lack of options. We are, puts me in the mind of an old cartoon that said, "We so poor, the only luxury we can afford is fucking." Well, we're so poor that our only resources are time and prudence. It's the fast, cheap, good riff that I often talk about. You can pick any two. You can have it fast and cheap, or fast and good, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, we can throw a loop forward in time and try to think ahead, and that means that we can do things more economically. Where we're being profligate is time. Now, I know that from a number of perspectives, time is short, but it's not so short that we have that we can fly off the handle or go off half-cocked and the rest. We need to think this through properly. There's also the idea of internal and external orientation, which I just sort of touched on, in the sense that we all have to know what we're doing and how and why. It's the idea of establishing shared definition, raising a banner. You have a flag around which people can orient. I'm saying that metaphorically, in the sense that people have an idea of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how to cooperate based on the fact that we, share these same goals, which we've taken the time to all work on together. and develop buy-in from the stakeholders. All the different parties involved can come in and say, I like this part, I don't like that part, these kinds of things. There's the other idea, which is tell your story or others will tell it for you. And you may not like what they say. It's another reason to get your story straight, as it were. I think that's a major problem on the right now for decades, is that people have not been willing or able to put the time in to work their messaging out. And so they get smeared time and again by people who are willing and able to sit down and tell the story the way they wish for it to be understood. So without getting this communication strategy together, we can't cooperate as well. We can't stand up public-facing projects. We can't get money. We can't get lawyers. It's a very sensitive group of people who are unwilling to risk their reputations being tainted. We can't get institutional support. And worse, as I said, we can't launch a counter-narrative. So there are a number of reasons why I think this exercise is justified. If you want to hear more about all of that, go back and watch the first one on Strategy 1. So again, I'm a communications guy. That's another thing I covered in that. I am able to do this. I was recently listening to Millennial Woes. Check him out. He's now doing stuff regularly. You have to go over to Odyssey to see it, or follow him over on Telegram to follow his chats live there. He posts them later to Odyssey, but you can check it out there. Anyway, he was talking, and he was mentioning, that we need professionals, and I was kind of like, I'm a professional, and he was thinking more like, lawyers and the rest, but he was talking about, we need people who know how to do things and the rest. And I was saying, look, no, what we need is money, because if you have money, you can hire people to do things. Believe me, people will do things for a check, even high-powered lawyers. It's just those checks happen to be written for very large amounts, and they have to keep coming regularly. As my friend Tim has pointed out, the lawyers are like taxi cabs and hookers. As soon as you stop paying, things stop happening. So all that by way of saying, this is something I do know how to do. I'm going to do it in a thorough way. And in fact, in a way that's more thorough than I would normally do it for clients, because number one, I have more time. And number two, this is something that matters to me. So that by way of reviewing the business with strategy episode 1. Now we can move on to strategy episode 2. In that one, I was talking to Josh Neal, and there's quite a bit there. You can go back and check it out. The focus with this one was on the target part of, I know some people with quite a bit of experience with marketing and branding and advertising are in here, at least Mr. Ixme for sure. But for a lot of this work, you have to focus on the target. It's like when I was talking about segmentation earlier. You have to understand who you're talking to. You have to understand what motivates them. They'll break it down to different things. Sometimes they'll call it need states, or they'll try and characterize what's on offer as a value proposition. There's all sorts of ways of coming at it, but the important thing is that only when you understand the person that you're talking to can you understand how to speak to them, what matters to them, what they're likely to be receptive to. It's kind of like an example I've used in the past with when I talk about personas, if you prefer to avoid the Latin plural framing. There are different ways that you present yourself depending on what you're about, what you want to do. If you want to go and get yourself a bank loan, there's a certain face you're going to present. If you want to deal with a cop after you've been pulled over, there's a different face that you're going to present. If you're caring for your ill and aged mother, there's yet another face you're going to present. If you're trying to get laid, there's another face you're going to present. If you, for example, try to use your getting laid face with the cop, unless it's like some sort of rather odd porn video, it's not going to go well. And likewise, your mother's going to be a little freaked out if you're caring for her while she's convalescing and talking to her like she's a bank manager. There's a certain way you need to speak to people, and it has to do with the situation in which they find themselves, the circumstances of their life, the things that motivate them. And that is what I was after in a preliminary sense as a first pass at it with my discussion with Josh Neal. So I guess a way to summarize everything I've been trying to talk about here is that when you're trying to address or when you're trying to reach a person or you're trying to reach people, you have to understand who you're addressing, who they are, what they want, how they might be accepting, how they might be resistant. And remember, this might break out, as I was talking about before with segmentation. Number two, there's what you want to say to them. And then these, in turn, if I were to get into it, can break out into more specific things. Like it's more than one message. There's ways of phrasing it and framing it. It can go all the way down to the granular level of word selection, copywriting. There's a reason that the people who came up with the idea of vaccine hesitancy decided to call it that. They didn't want to call them anti-vaxxers, that they're perfectly willing in other circumstances to say they're anti-vaxxers. But in this case, they wanted to call it vaccine hesitancy. Because by calling it vaccine, calling the people who are against it anti-vaxxers, that would be to give oxygen to that fire. They would be deploying all their considerable tools for getting messages out there. And a part of that message would be the idea that there are people who are anti-vax. And, you're trying to get them to come in from out of the cold and, accept whatever it is that you have on offer. So they're very careful to call it vaccine hesitancy. And anybody who's worked in marketing communications or even PR, crisis management, they will know about this kind of thing where you sit down around a table with people and they're like, well, I don't know. You call it anti-vaxxing. Maybe let's just say that they're hesitant. They're not saying no. They're not flatly saying no. Let's characterize it as hesitancy. It's not they're afraid of it. Why? Their being afraid of it might cause people to imagine that there'd be a reason to be afraid of it. So let's call it hesitancy. That's what I mean when I say that when you come to the idea of what you want to say to them, you can subdivide it, get ever more granular. We don't have to get into that here. The last thing, other than knowing who you're addressing, knowing what you want to say to them, is having a very clear idea of what action you want them to take as a result of hearing the message. And for all of these things, it can be very, very important to know who you're dealing with and their psychology and to understand what's going on. So anyway, I had an interesting discussion with Josh Neal. You can go back and check that out yourselves. For me, the most interesting observation that emerged is that for most of these people, they don't feel like they need help in any way, shape, or form. They gain things, at least in the short term, from keeping their head buried in the sand. They avoid being smeared. They avoid being canceled, deplatformed, pushed out of their jobs, refused banking services. They get laid. They get scholarships and grants. They get their own TV shows. They're praised. They get to wallow in the comforting feeling that they're not out of line. They're happy that they can claim to be on what they like to call the right side of history. So this isn't like going to people who know that they're in a crisis situation. It's quite different, in fact. So a few things occur to me when I reflect on this observation or on these observations, these things that came out when I was talking with Josh Neal. Further on in this series, I still really would like to talk to a professional with real world experience with therapy, or work in a clinical setting, this kind of thing, with cult interventions or whatever, but someone who has considerable experience and real experience of it. I don't need a shade tree therapist or psychologist. And I'd like to talk to a person like this to hear about how best practices or effective strategies for intervening unfold when you're dealing with people who've not yet seen the bottom drop out of it. That's a very important point. Again, these are not people who have seen the inevitable results of the course that they've chosen for themselves. These are people who still feel that they're in the right. They feel that they're doing the right thing. They have not yet hit the brick wall, so to speak. So how does one intervene in those circumstances? You're going to sound like some crank coming out of nowhere and saying, why don't you come join me? I'm a fox with my tail cut off and it's very comfortable. And all of you would like it very much if you came and joined me as a fox with your tail cut off. So even without any real knowledge in this area, I can guess that it's probably going to be a very difficult, very uphill battle and one that holds out very little chance of success. The thing is that we are in a situation where we have limited resources. And I feel like for that reason, it should be looked into, because we've got to explore every possible angle of approach. The image of opportunitas, it's a variant of the classical image of kairos, comes to mind. When you're talking about opportunity, you have to seize it when it's coming. Basically, it's all about knowing the right moment. So even if they're not receptive now, it's important to know what we want to say and what we're going to unfold in front of them in order to, bring them around to our side or successfully communicate the message. And, being forewarned about what all that's about is has much in common with being forearmed, as they say. This image of opportunity on the ball, I've talked about this before, so some people may be familiar with this image. You'll notice that the figure there has a shaved head with a long forelock. And the image of opportunity is atop this sphere. This is a piece of art from the School of Montaigne. It's Italian, probably 15th century, if I had to guess. I can't remember, so don't come screaming at me if I'm wrong. But the point is that the head is shaved and the forelock is hanging down in front. And the ball means that the direction that opportunity is going to take as it's moving by is never clear. If you've ever seen somebody on top of a ball, it can go in all directions. It's not like a bicycle wheel where the alignment of the wheel will suggest to you which way it's going to go. So with opportunity, it's important, this is all a roundabout way of saying this, to seize it by the forelock. And you can only seize it by the forelock when you see it coming. Once it's passed you by, you don't have a chance, which is why this person is being restrained, because it's already gone by. All you're going to get if you try to seize that lock of hair is the shaved head on the back, which isn't going to give you any purchase. So this is another reason why it would be important, even if we don't know that it's going to work, to try to reach people who are not yet aware of their crisis. Working out how we would do it and what the best possible pathway to do it is will likely be useful because of what we see embodied in this image. If we haven't planned for it ahead, we can't reach out and seize it as it passes by. We will always be reactive. Then there is the business of, how you deal with people who aren't really aware of the fact that they're in this crisis. There's not just knowing how to deal with them and knowing that we should find a way to do so and anticipate, so when the moment comes, we can strike while the iron is hot. There's also people who are in denial about their circumstances, or who flat out would rather return to, their blue-pilled state. How do you deal with someone who claims to be happy and is in fact miserable, but refuses to see it, because this sort of realization comes at a great cost? Why on earth would someone want to be yanked out of their comfortable rest only to be seen that the sky is falling around them? So again, this sort of underscores what I'm talking about. The idea of getting someone in who knows about interventions, who has some experience with therapy or work in a clinical setting to help people who might be in denial about things. There have to be best practices from this field, and I think that we should take a look at them. Again, this is from the perspective of understanding our target and what motivates them, understanding where they're coming from, being able to reach them. So if anyone listening to this fits the description of someone with experience in this area, or someone sympathetic to the concerns of the dissident right, whom you think would be a good fit, then please do let me know. Switch the screen over here so you can see me again instead of this picture of Cypher, who wants to be blue-pilled again. Let me find my notes. All right, so the next thing that I want to cover is strategy 3, and this was a discussion with Apostolic Majesty. And this was an excellent discussion. I would recommend his channel highly. It was really a presentation on his part. I was silent through much of it because he just, listen when he talks because he's sharing good stuff. You can find him. His channel is Apostolic Majesty. Over there, you can hear him covering all sorts of aspects of history. He's a great host over there, really good guests as well. I've been on there a few times. There's also Columba, and there's Marcus Furius Pertinax. So I recommend Apostolic Majesty's channel highly. So with that discussion with him, I had talked to him about looking back into history in order to find examples of when reactionary movements in the past had pushed and could be construed or understood to have been successful. And that was an interesting sort of safari tour of different historical periods and situations. And I was very happy to have him on. I'm very thankful he took the time to do it. But what did I learn from that? What did we learn from that that is important that we can review at this point? Well, I guess to set the stage for what I want to talk about, I should mention that communications always takes place in a context, and it's always just an arm of the fight. Like if the military goes out, propaganda is going to be a part of it. There's also the issue of signals and communication within the operating military bodies, within them and between different branches and the rest. There's the aspect of signals intelligence, but even so, if you construe communications that broadly, there's all kinds of other stuff. There's logistics, there's dealing with casualties, there's, production lines to make sure that you get spare parts for tanks that break down. There's a gazillion things going on. And I recognize that communications is always only going to be a part of that. However, to make it most effective, anyone who's developing communications needs to understand that they are a part of this broader context. And it's not just of how they're operating and what they're doing, but it's what Sun Tzu used to call weather, right? There's weather, there's terrain. There are all sorts of things beyond the commander and his armies and their morale and their capabilities. There's this big broader context that you find in Sun Tzu's Art of War, discussed as terrain and weather. And that's the circumstances that you find yourself in. So, look at the whole business of, what is it, Crécy or Agincourt? I can't remember. But the idea is that the horsemen come down and they hit muddy ground and they're not as effective and they get all bunched up and they get, sorely tested by having cloth yard shafts fired through their faces. That's an issue with terrain, but it's also with weather, because the circumstances of the weather are what led to the ground being wet in that area. So an understanding that broader context should inform all the stuff that we're working on with communications. And part of that includes history, because history bears on all of these things. So communication strategy has to be formulated in the greater context of the fight and how it's unfolding, how it will unfold. So our assessment has to be contextualized against the background of the larger situation. That was part of the reason for having AM on. To phrase it another way, it's desirable to know what happened in the past so that we can gain some sense not only of what's happening now, but also of what's possible. If you're like, I got a great idea, we can try X, right? But then you look in history and you're like, wow, every time X has been attempted in the past, it's been just an abject failure. Well, that should be a signal that maybe you should think twice about trying X. Or if you want to try to be successful with X, then definitely don't do these other things that everybody did. So that's why I was talking to Apostolic Majesty about history, and that's what I had hoped to sort of unpack, as they like to say. So in this respect, there were many, many insights. As I said, this first discussion that I had with AM was about return to previous traditions. Basically, it was about reactionary movements in the past and whether any of them had been successful. If you haven't listened to that discussion in its entirety, it's definitely worth your time. Again, definitely worth your time, much like his channel. It underscored a number of themes. And one of them, in my view anyway, begs for a further historical review. AM's examples tended to show that regime restoration is always a kind of imposition. The restoration of the regime is always a kind of imposition. And at a minimum, if only to overwrite the preceding impositions of progress. As sort of came out in our discussion, this entails centralized control, because the imposition of progress to which the reactionary responds itself entails increasingly centralized control as a prerequisite for the offending imposition. And we see time and again that centralization and universalization, as well as it happens, it becomes the theme no matter what side we're talking about. Now, if that didn't come across clearly, the first thing is that when, let's call them the forces of progress, we can call them leftists or whatever, they're generally authoritarian. They generally want centralized control. They want to unite all under heaven. They've got this utopian idea, or ideas, these ideas, and they need to be forced down our throats from the top down. That means they need to centralize control. Well, if anyone wishes to react to that and restore the previous state of affairs, they got a twofold problem. The first problem is that they've got to overcome that centralized authority. And that requires mustering the same sort of concerted action, equal to or greater than, hopefully, that they're faced with. I think my grammar just fell apart there, but bear with me. The idea is that if you're going to overcome people who have centralized control, you're going to have a certain degree of it too. I mean, unless you've gotten very clever with some sort of distributed asymmetric arrangement. The other thing is that when you come back into power, if there's a restoration of tradition, as it were, you're going to have to take apart everything that they've just built, and they've done it with centralized control. And that's where the temptation comes in. You know, I will take the ring of sorrow and I will use it for good. The impulse to take advantage of that centralized power is a strong one, let us say, because it makes certain things easier. It ensures that in your actions to restore the previous state of affairs, that you can do it efficiently, you can, manage it from the center, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got this twofold thing. In order to overcome the centralization and the organization, it often requires, I won't say always, but often requires an equal or greater degree of organization and centralization. And even if it doesn't, once you take the reins of power, you're sitting there going, well, hell, the guy set this up. I've got a better back scratcher now. Why would I throw it away for trying to reach it myself? This is a problem. How do I say this? It's this idea of no matter what side you're on, the tendency is to unite all under heaven. So it suggests perhaps an almost inescapable dialectical progress towards ever more centralized control. And if this is true, this is a real issue. So you can ask me, well, why does this matter in terms of communication strategy? Well, as I've already said, communication strategy is always already a part of the overall strategy. And what this means is that communication strategy is meaningless if it doesn't take into account historical developments and processes. So if I wish to develop a communication strategy and messaging, it has to fit within the larger strategic picture as it's developed over time. So what use, for example, is any strategy or messaging if it doesn't take into account the facts of history? So if we come back to this idea of a ceaseless progress towards an ever more universal, ever more centralized situation, if this really is a fact of history, if I can use this expression, then the prognosis could well be dire. Or if it's not dire, it's at least Spenglerian, right? And well, why does this matter? Well, because, if we talk about ourselves as nationalists and we have the idea that certain peoples are associated with certain territories and cultures and bloodlines over time, certain places, then a constant development towards more and more centralized control is going to threaten these things. Because, I mean, how often do you see things like devolution work? How often do you see people turn over the reins of power and they're like, oh, nah, I'll just give up on the centralized thing and just pass it on to everybody. See, this is sort of this, you know, come at it from this side and then come at it from this side dialectical progress, because left or right, if the action and reaction always necessitate greater and greater centralized control, then no matter, it doesn't matter if they hang a red flag over it or a blue flag over it, you're still going to be stuck at a situation where they've, so to speak, united all under heaven. So with all of this in mind, I realized that I might have asked Apostolic Majesty the wrong question. It occurred to me that it's entirely possible that I shouldn't have asked about reactionary movements in the past and whether or not they've been successful. I mean, to some extent, you can say, well, it was good because going through the exercise, I realized this piece. But if it's possible that both progress and reaction both necessarily entail ever greater centralization of power, then in what way does the success or the lack thereof of reactionary movements even matter? The results, if one is looking at the bigger strategic picture, end up being much the same: the uniting of all under heaven and the ever greater centralization of power and control. So if we dispense with this idea of reactionary versus progressive, what if we look at it instead through the lens of centripetal, tending towards centralization of power, versus centrifugal, tending towards its distribution? And you can see the diagram here in case people don't understand what these words mean. Centripetal, of course, the idea that it's all coming together, being centralized and controlled. Centrifugal, you could think of as devolution or the granting of powers, or, you know, localization, these sorts of things. Actually, these two trends got covered in the world of marketing, advertising, industry, and you know, business and all the rest as globalization versus localization. But I think centripetal and centrifugal are useful in that they're a little bit more neutral, they're a little bit more abstract, and they also introduce what I think is an interesting angle to all of this, because here it's less about reaction and progress, or globo homo versus tradition. It's more about where the power lies and whether or not there is room for these distinct nations and groups to do their thing within a framework. You know, so if I'm just sitting here, you know, running in first one way in a circle, you know, calling it progress, and then running another way on the circle, calling it reaction, if it all tends towards centralization of control, then none of it matters anyway, and it's all a wank fest, a waste of our time. So, yeah, this is what I would like to have AM back on again for. I'd like to frame the question a bit differently. If we look back into history, is it possible to identify successful centrifugal movements of devolution? And by this, I mean ones that were premeditated and intentional, as distinct from any that might have come about in the wake of some disaster, like the collapse of empires or larger territories into smaller ones. So yeah, that is our review of the strategy series thus far. Now I'd like to move on to questions, but if you will, please, ladies and gentlemen, keep them focused on the topic, which is the strategy series itself. This is not an AMA stream, so I would like to keep this focused on the topic at hand. So while you're thinking of things that you can ask me about, hopefully good questions, since we are in the question phase of this. If it starts to suck from here on out, it's your own fault for not asking good questions. I'm going to go ahead and get my chat window up. Make sure I have it set on live chat to see everything. And let me just find my notes here, because it's likely you guys are going to have to get your act together to ask me questions. Please, please put an @semiagog on them so that I can see them. They'll be highlighted. Let me just take a look at my strategy notes here and see what I have, because there is quite a bit that I have taken a look at. Hang on, I'm getting some audio here from the YouTube side of the stream running. Let me kill that. And just see if there's anything else I want to cover here. That'll give you guys some time to ask good questions. Also to suggest things that I might cover in this series that you think would be good to take a look at, this sort of thing. Mnemonic images. I'm going to be using the art of memory and laying this out. Gambits. Yeah, there's the whole thing of celebrity endorsements and alpha monkeys. There's the whole idea of two against the middle as a framework. There's the whole subject of performance degrading and resource depleting distractions. I covered some of this in my first clip, meaningless victories that you can offer to your enemies to keep them busy. There's the idea of chaff, defensive posture triggers. I can't go into all of this right now because I'm still working on it. Yeah, there's also the subject of talking to Christians. I've already mentioned that I want to do that here in future. Please come up with good questions, because as soon as I finish reviewing this, I'm going to jump over there. And if you guys haven't come up with good stuff, I'll have to end the stream, which would suck because I'd like it to run for the full 2 hours. But that will depend on you, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. The Christian one, as I've mentioned before, that's going to be very much about universalism versus nationalism is one of the main themes that I would like to explore. I have to figure out which folks to have on. If I'm not mistaken, I think Lambda has expressed an interest. I'd like to have him on for it if it can be arranged. I might talk to AM about it. Perhaps Columba. Yeah, I'm going to have to give it some thought. But I'd like to get a group of Christians together to talk about what sort of messages they're concerned with, what would have to be packaged into the thinking and the value proposition of what's on offer in order to bring them on side. What sort of things, for example, might be deal killers for them. That's one of the reasons why I want to take a look at the idea of universalism versus nationalism, because I think there are many respects in which much of what is taught as Christianity these days would seem to preclude an active focus on these distinct and heterogeneous areas. But then again, it's entirely possible, even probable, that my thinking that is only a result of my ignorance of the church, its various manifestations, and how it is developed. What other things do I have here? There's the goal orientation aspect. Long-term strategy, birth or breed it versus convince or convert, generational strategies, because a lot of this that I'm trying to put together is not just to change people's minds tomorrow. I call that the Moses strategy, where you take them out into the desert, raise 2 generations with the new thinking, bring them back, and they can't be shaken in their faith. Crisis anticipation stuff, that goes with what I was talking about before with opportunitas as an image, anticipate what's coming, and then when it does come, you're ready to pull a lever to entirely exploit that crisis. That's something that needs to be looked at. Audience targeting in general, we've already talked about a little bit of that in terms of the Josh Neal stuff, the psychological profile. I want to look at mockery thus far, because that has been very successful to date as the sort of asymmetrical guerrilla warfare approach for the disenfranchised to come in and make a dent in the seemingly invincible facade of the status quo. I've already covered that particular as grappling with universalism as a universal drive. Then there's the basic stuff. Who are we? What are we doing? Who are they? What are they doing? What is the nature of the interaction? I think I covered some of this stuff in the first one. There's a whole section I want to get into deeply, which is providing the disaffected and disenfranchised potential elites with access. That will be very, very interesting indeed, because they're out there just waiting to have all of this pitched to them. Everybody's worried about the elites who are currently in place. There are whole categories of people who, just ask them, they'll tell you, feel that they are elites who have been disenfranchised. Those are the ones who should have someone say, brother, have you heard the good news? Yeah. reframing activism for the right, because activism is a dirty word. There's a whole section of that needs to be gone into. Yeah, what are we selling? What is the value proposition? Yeah, forced integration actually being disintegration. These are sub themes, you know, the whole business of freedom of association. Then I've just got some rough notes, you know, reality is racist. I still like that one. That needs to go in my aphorism book. Okay, so those are some of the background ideas. Hopefully we've got some questions here and we can roll into this. I will jump back. I can close up these notes, but let me leave them open just in case you guys have any questions about them. Let me move my previous notes over here so I can see everything that's going on. We now have a full hour and 10 minutes, and it's up to you, ladies and gentlemen, whether or not it's going to suck. What do we have? All right. I think if I've missed anybody earlier than this repost, Herman Hoth asks, let me see if I can see, I can't go back and post it on screen, asks how to get around the increasing power of big tech now that legacy media is waning. Well, I mean, a lot of people are thinking about that. And that is not specifically a communication strategy issue, or at least as I understand it at present. I don't want to rule it out because then I can't have a big light bulb go off in my brain. So I guess, you know, I could try to look at that from the perspective of communication strategy. You know, it could be communication strategy in terms of framing them as the assholes and the bad guys and us as the good guys, you know, and that in turn could act as a capsule around, like the sugar coating on the pill for a legal strategy or whatever. But a lot of people are currently thinking about that. I tend to think that, well, here's a way of saying it. If we can come up with the right terminology, here's a good answer, actually. This is a good answer. Thanks for asking the question. If we can come up with the white way, if we can come up with the white way of framing these questions, I don't know what sort of Freudian slip that was. If we can come up with the right way of framing and phrasing all of these issues, then it's at least conceivable that the tech powers that be that are censoring everything would be ashamed to do so because of how it's been framed. I know that's a big ask. That's sort of a pie in the sky. That's the moonshot. But that, in fact, is what we're after. The way of framing this in such fashion that anyone who tries to block us from sharing the message in its newly framed, palatable, and acceptable fashion will be vilified, cast out, ostracized, defenestrated, thrown into the outer darkness. So next question. This looks like, if my Greek is right, this is politeia. Why explicitly exclude the collapse of empires? Isn't this our goal in a sense, the collapse of the American empire? Good question. From my perspective, looking at that has value from the perspective of knowing how it's likely to happen. And if it does, what do you do? How can it be taken advantage of? However, generally what we see with the collapse of empires is that existing power players come in and seize it. So, I mean, I hate to say it, but I tend to think that the idea that the American empire, I happen to be an American, so, you know, I have issues with the whole business of calling it the empire. And I have issues with Americans who just want to like hang out with people who shit talk America. But there's plenty that we're responsible for, and it's bad. The pause is bad. But we're not the only ones responsible. I posted some stuff on Twitter about it, you know, where it's like, you know, America's responsible for everything, signed some random British guy. And I'm like, wow, have you heard about the British Empire? Have you heard about the Anglo establishment? Anyway, that's a side thing. The main point that I'm trying to make here is that generally when things just sort of fall apart, like the American empire falls to pieces, what's going to happen? We'll just seize the day. No, other power players who are ready are going to come in, and centralization of control or parceling it out and taking control of their own little zones. Like when, the Ottoman Empire fell apart, the Greeks were supposed to take the coast. Everybody was supposed to carve off their little area. Sanjak of Alexandretta would go to France. All the great powers would carve up their little piece and maybe leave the Turks some titular little rump state in Anatolia. Maybe if they're good, they'll get a little bit of Black Sea coastline. I don't tend to think that looking at empires falling apart is going to be particularly valuable. Though I'm not going to rule it out, because good ideas could come from anywhere. So, I mean, you have a point there. Look at it, see what there is to learn from it. The reason that I'm focused on the idea of intentional projects of centrifugal movements with the power rather than centralizing it gets distributed again is because we're in this globalized framework. And, now we have three great powers, Russia sort of, clinging to it, the United States furiously trying, so-called United States of America, whatever it is now, trying to maintain its position like a cock on the dunghill, China trying to come up. But more and more we see that there are fewer and fewer constituent units that make up the elements, the pieces on the game board. Like a lot of energy has gone into trying to make one thing out of Europe. You got talks about a European, an African economic union. You've got talk about stuff in Russia, with their own economic zone. Everybody's having problems with it. It's not over, certainly. But generally, we have a centripetal movement. And so rather than worrying too much about what might happen, when the American empire falls apart, I want to look at when people do it intentionally. So I guess the TLDR, sorry to be so long-winded, Politeia, is intentionally doing something other than centralizing power is what is of most interest to me, because that, I think, is what nationalists wish to do. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I mean, this has to do with this shared definition and getting buy-in from stakeholders. That's an exercise too. So maybe people will be like, no, what we imagine is all these nation states, but there's one, United Nations at the center of them that ensures that they maintain. I think that's unrealistic. Of course, I think it's flatly absurd. But maybe somebody feels that way. But for my part, I think the path that I'd like to explore, and I'll keep an open mind about it, is the idea of intentional centrifugal distribution of power, and whether or not there's been any hope for it in history. It may turn out, again, that we're just trapped in this dialectical process, which, would mean that the commies are right, and that ultimately they're just going to endlessly go towards uniting all under heaven, and only a crisis will allow the fragments to break apart and the rest of it to do, the other possibilities to become real. Ikus says, can you define your friends and your enemies, specifically among the right? Yes. For purposes of this exercise and for purposes of cooperating in this process, my friends are those who push back against anti-whites and who wish to stop all of the attacks on white people, all the degradation of them, all the smearing of them, all the attacks on them, and all the destruction of their cultures and patrimony. And to some extent, it's those who believe that that the nations that make up the white peoples should have within their power their own destiny, to some way to shape it and to keep it alive, so that the different languages and cultures and peoples can be maintained, that they're not going to disappear into a sort of a mystery meat swirl, as it were. For enemies, and I would prefer to frame it as competitors, for reasons that should be obvious to you, and if they're not, I won't explain them. In terms of competitors, I would say that those are people who do wish to smear, degrade, denigrate, attack whites and to destroy or otherwise usurp their patrimony and their habitat. And likewise, those who wish to destroy the sort of tapestry of different nations and peoples that exist across the world. So yeah, there's the quick answer on that. El Vaquero 555, Semigog, have you read The Great Leveler? He argues that it takes catastrophe to decrease inequality. Decreasing inequality is increasing equality. He argues that it takes catastrophe to increase equality, which is to say to decrease inequality. And then parentheses centralization. I'm not sure if the catastrophe that decreases inequality is the centralization, or if the inequality itself is the centralization, and that inequality increases during peaceful, prosperous times. No, I haven't read it, and I'm not sure what the bearing is, because I think inequality is just a fact. And I'm not sure that anywhere except under the law that it could be desirable to decrease inequality. I mean, it just seems like a utopian fool's errand, but I haven't read the book and I'm not sure the context. So yeah, I'd have to give that some more thought. Lambda says, Semigog, it seems the left are fighting downhill. Do you agree? And if so, do we want to acknowledge it, or is that defeat? If I understand you correctly, you're saying they have the high ground and the position of advantage. That certainly seems to be the case at present, unless somebody has a really strange, they're about to turn the side of the little box and the clown's about to pop out and, shake things up, which I guess is possible, but it's looking like a more and more distant possibility. Yeah, I think the only thing, again, if I understand what you're asking, I think the only way to approach this is to be, it's like, don't lie to your doctor. If you're going to sit down with a general who's going to tell you that everything's great when literally all is lost, yeah, you're spinning your wheels. You're not going to get any traction. It's a wasted exercise. So, I mean, I heard Millennial Woes was talking in his live chat earlier today, and he was talking about how everybody's mocking the leftists and talking out like they're all idiots and everything. And I'm like, yeah, well, yeah. And he pointed out that it's ridiculous because not all of them are like that. There are many that are highly intelligent. And I threw in there in the chat, in any case, you look kind of ridiculous when you're making fun of the people who are currently succeeding against you. So, what does that make you other than somebody who's ridiculously in denial? So, yeah, I think an honest assessment of one's circumstances and an acknowledgement of reality is always already a good thing. All right, let's see here. Now, I'm going to be skipping over questions that are not directly related to the subject of the clip. Forgive me for that, but I want to keep this focused so that when people open this stream up thinking that it is about strategy, it will be from beginning to end. So please, folks who ask different kinds of questions, don't be pissed off at me that I'm not answering anything that isn't related to the subject of this. People who have questions about Tim, go back to my last video that Ask Me Anything stream, and you can be brought up to date on that. 99 Iron Duke, hello sir, says Semigog, did you see the recent video by the distributist on writing right-wing fiction? He would be worth talking to. No, I haven't seen it, but I'll take a look. I know that he's sort of adjacent to like Aaron McIntyre and Charlemagne and other folks like that I do follow. So I'll take a look. Let's see here. Politea, one idea of decentralization is the creation of all the fiefdoms in HRE. I'm not sure, the acronym's not clicking for me. I feel like I should know it, but I'm not sure what it is. Though that is also partially due to things like land colonialism, land colonization. I'll go into more details in the comments. I'm not sure what what that's all about. Lambda says, Semigog, is PUA framing theory a helpful lens? Why is that not immediately? I feel like I should know this. PUA line of... Oh, pickup artist. That's why I heard about it. I was just on a stream with A about this. An interesting stream. Yes. Pickup artists self-identified as dating coaches, the seduction community, or the pickup community, because everyone's got to be a community, don't they? So let me come back to the question now that I've oriented myself. Is PUA framing theory a helpful lens? Let's see if they've got this in Wikipedia. Framing. The borrowing of the terminology corresponds to a process called framing, which means recontextualization of a situation within the perspective of another situation. The process of framing the terms from several different domains are used. Well, I'm not big on PUA, so I learned differently. I learned in the field rather than academically. Yeah, I can see if I understand. So what I'm trying to say is I might not understand all the implications and the context of what they're calling framing here. But if I do understand it, that's all that communications is about, is to cast a different light, to hang a different halo over it, to set it up against a different background. You know, like take a look at the same thing that moves in a certain way, like a pair of scissors, right? This is an example I used to use with clients. If you see a pair of scissors and a comb, then you think barber, right? But if you see a pair of scissors and a spool of thread with a little needle sticking in it, you think sewing, right? Or make them a little bit longer, give them wooden handles and make the clip shorter at the end, and you think cutting hedges, right? Or adjust what they look like slightly, and you've got a set of lock cutters. It's the same object, it's the same tool, more or less, but recontextualized for different applications or situations. That's what I think of as framing. And the simplest way to put it is one of the tricks to what I'm trying to do with exploring the communications aspect here is that you can find a way to take, you know, what's being framed. Well, you do it with a game. Like they say, white supremacy, it's the most evil thing ever. And, you know, everybody's a white supremacist. And, you know, all kinds of white people are going, which one of us, even the most foamy mouthed, dissident right person is saying that we're absolutely supreme. You know, a lot of these guys will come in and talk to you about how the East Asians score higher in IQs or whatever, or the average income of Indians or East Asians in the United States compared to whites or whatever. So it's like the whole idea of white supremacy is on its face absurd and ultimately just an anti-white smear. How do you reframe that? So I'll play games in Twitter where I'll be like anti-white, and then I'll put after it, and you may have seen some of this. Some of you have, if you follow me on Twitter. You know, I'll put when whites dare to do what only non-whites are allowed to do. That's a reframing. That is a reframing. It's a recontextualization, and you have to go, oh, wait a minute. No, I mean, it tries to be cute and it tries to be concise or whatever, and you know, to some extent, sometimes when I do that, it is successful. At other times, it's not. But yeah, that's the basic process, is to reframe all of this. And there is a way to, you know, remove the comb from next to the scissors and instead put down a spool and a needle. And suddenly what you used to call, you know, barber shears have to be called, you know, sewing shears. You know, I guess this is all breaking down. I'm not proving my skill with communication at the moment, but hopefully that should be clear. Now, to the details of PUA framing theory, I think it was Red Hawk that I was on with, you know, that might be somebody to talk to, but I'm not entirely sure about how to apply it beyond the general sense of reframing, recontextualization that I just, in long-winded fashion, covered. Sabrina C1, hello, Miss Lady, is talking about Stephen Carson from Radical Liberation. I guess you're just talking about Radlib. Is interesting and has many important things to speak on. Yeah, I'm familiar with Radlib, like his channel. I've even appeared on it, as well as his co-host, Mad Merc. Yeah. Yes. All right. What's the next one? And thank you for that, Sabrina C1, this lady. This from King Salmonfish, except now it just refreshed and I've gotten lost. Hang on a second. I'll be right there with you, peoples. Sorry. What the hell's going on? Okay, yeah, no? Whoa, I'm way behind. I got to go faster, people. Sorry, I've taken too long on all of these. Where am I? King Salmonfish. In regards to critical race theory, USA is racially diverse, had outlawed slavery and promoted civil rights. China is openly racist. Can you see why calling racist is so counterintuitively effective? No, other than the fact that whites have such a issue with not wanting to embrace any kind of in-group preference, and they've just been hammered with every kind of manipulative media messaging for so long. Yeah, I'm not quite clear where you're going with that, but I will think about it. 99 Iron Duke says, Semigog, I know Morgoth has also talked about the need for the right to gatekeep our culture, such as Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Yeah, gatekeeping is an interesting thing. But whomever it was, Ikius or whatever the handle was, who asked earlier, what is the friend-enemy distinction, was coming at that. That was what that cute little question was about. It's basically like a tell me your name, from whence do you hail, are you friend or are you foe? The exercise I'm talking about doing here, which includes getting buy-in from stakeholders or, working through the elements of what it is we can do, what it is we should do, what it is that's possible, in terms of looking at history and the rest, how these things can be answered, what's the best way to do it, developing the communication strategy, which is also a part of the larger strategy. All of that will hopefully yield a few key things that everybody can agree on, that not only can be done, but should be done, and that they're willing to do themselves. And once those things are figured out, you have the sword that cuts with yes and no. Because then you can say, well, are you on board with this? Do you agree with this and this? These three basic things, which are designed to be inclusive to some extent, but to keep other people out. People who will get in the way, who will be distractions, whatever, or will be, or worse. That I think, yeah, the idea of gatekeeping, basically what I'm trying to say, sorry, I got to do this faster because there are a bunch of other people's questions and now time actually is getting on. Gatekeeping can only take place when the people who are on the inside, who want to keep, let us say, malicious parties out or ineffective parties out or whatever, gatekeeping can only take place once the people on the inside have agreed about what matters to them, so that gatekeeping aspect can be applied. Basically, you need criteria for who gets in through the who can thread the needle and who can't. It's like round peg, square hole. If you haven't created a square hole, then you don't have the criteria, so to speak, to exclude a round peg. So hence another reason to deal with the communication exercise, because clarity about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you intend to do it is a prerequisite for, well, doing anything intentional. Anyway. King Salmonfish again, Semigog, did you see the video of the black lady saying there's no such thing as trans in regard to a situation, I think in a spa? What do you think of communicating so strongly against illusion? I feel like we're getting out of the theme of strategy, and kind of getting in the weeds with specific instances. I mean, unless you can frame that in some general sense related to communication strategy, other than the idea of, just basically telling people what you think. I mean, in some cases, it's very, very useful to tell someone bluntly what you think is the case. Particularly if you're simply making a statement about why something cannot continue. That's basically saying no, right? Like when you rap a dog on its snout and say no, or, probably not wrap it on its snout, unless you want to injure it. But anyway, if you want to stop the dog and say no, that's when you just bluntly tell them your position. But it's a very different world if you're trying to convince someone or change their mind. And so that's the idea of whether or not your communication strategy is related to mobilization or if it's related to conversion, which is another breakdown. All right, moving on. Sorry, peoples, I know I have some other questions down here. And sorry, King Salmonfish, that I couldn't answer that better. All right, another one from King Salmonfish, Peterson's map of meaning. That's another question that isn't related to the theme here. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep the questions on the idea of communication strategy. Herman Hoth, that's about CRT and whether it'll be counterproductive and wake up the normies. That's another one not related to our topic. Sorry, I just want to keep it focused, people. Lambda says, Semigog, is it possible that the level of centralization is a natural result of the growth of a population? It looks like the left are winning through tactics, but in fact are winning by default. I'm guessing that what you're referring to there, and just guessing, is that as a natural consequence, when you have larger and larger populations and quote unquote complex society, and it's certainly a high degree of integrated services and features, like power has to run and you have to have your air conditioning and God knows what's going on with the digital communications. And that's going to become even more intense once you get like edge computing and, all these different, and 5G with, all the new bandwidth for your appliances. And that's going to yield gobs and gobs of data, which the centralized planners can, it becomes much more complex with roads and highways and bridges and logistics and the integration of all these different features that there has to be centralized control. Well, maybe, but I tend to think that there's something almost neurobiological inherent in it, that we tend to drive towards this idea of uniting all under heaven, or the old idea of the Lord of the Four Quarters, or, you could look for it reflected, for example, in something like paganism moving in phases towards, a vague recognition of a central overarching uber God, right, to more concrete, like first you get the idea of Yahweh or Jehovah, which is the notion of this jealous Lord of this one people. And then you sort of move on to the idea of a universal God with a universal message for all of mankind for the salvation of souls. It tends towards more centralization, unification, and universalization. But the question you're asking would apply to some extent, or it seems to echo what I myself was saying in terms of this notion of, damn it, lost my train of thought. Oh, whether or not this dialectical process towards further and further centralization is ineluctable, in which case then you'd only ever have a devolution of power of some sort or another. I'm probably not using that term strictly correctly, but you would only have a centrifugal movement away from the center with a distribution of power in the case of crisis. And then Politea's comment would be, would be more relevant, because it'd be like, well, it's never going to happen unless something breaks. I mean, think about, you can carry it over to psychology, right? Where you have an ego, this centralizing sense of self that organizes the various persona, that has some sort of uneasy truce with the subconscious or unconscious, but coterminous with the extent of the physical body. It sees itself as a unitary entity. But then look what happens when its view of the world gets shattered by some horrible crisis moment, and schizophrenia results, and the glue, so to speak, that holds the various personalities together and deploys them at will melts in the fire of the negative experience. And then these independent elements, which can even manifest as entirely independent personalities in some cases anyway, appear. Maybe we've got that sort of thing. You only get schizophrenia with the thing being shattered, and that there's only hope for a centrifugal movement of power away from the center in times of crisis when everything gets smashed. Maybe it really is Spenglerian, but this just sort of underscores this idea of talking to academic agent, apostolic majesty, apostolipstics, sorry. This underscores why I'm so interested in talking to AM about the aspect with history, because it may well be that many times in the past there have been movements that decentralized and worked out just fine. I'm too ignorant of history to opine on it. Oh, Polites over here said, sorry, I had to use an acronym due to the YouTube character limit. That's Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so let me just go back and see if I can find the original question from Politea again. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry that this is not as entertaining a stream as many of them are, but I have to dig into these issues. Okay, one idea of decentralization is the creation of all the fiefdoms in the Holy Roman Empire, though that is also partially due to things like land colonization. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, if anybody's going to be able to throw down with all that, it would be Apostolic Majesty, unless Politea is actually like a sock puppet for Apostolic Majesty. Yes, that would be interesting to look at. I just have to say that sadly, my knowledge of history isn't sufficient to just, laterally, excuse me, move over into that subject. Death by Cognitive Dissonance says, Semigog, I do think we'll eventually have some financial ability to enter the lawfare game, but where should the time and money go? Anti-white stuff, tech censorship, your thoughts. From my perspective, and my perspective is limited, it comes from communications. I like to think of the broader perspective in which the communications will occur, because that makes it most effective. However, there may be many areas where somebody who has a better sense of what this legal issue hinges upon, and so they know that you have to go after this because it's sort of the beating heart of this whole thing. The 1964 Civil Rights Act comes to mind. However, in terms of what I'm thinking about, it would very likely have to do with what's on message or not. So, if we learn that the best way to frame, God, it's going to get so abstract that it's not going to matter. Let me just put it like that, because I don't have an answer yet. I haven't developed the communication strategy, so I can't say this is the core of the communication strategy. So this would make a really good headline if we attack this people in order to create this reaction on the part of our opponents, attacked legally and civilly, you understand me? If we attack them with this idea, metaphorically speaking, and go after them legally, it will generate these headlines, which will cause them to react in this way, which will give us another victory morally based on how they respond. That whole thing can only come together once the strategy is laid out. So I'd love to answer the very question that you're talking about there, but it'll have to wait until some future point where the strategy is all there. Okay. We are now at about an hour and a half. I do not see any further questions. So I'm going to give it a minute or two, look back through here and see if I missed anything. Maybe I did. Hang on, wait. Maybe I missed some. Oh, wait. I think I missed some. Let me get to where I was. Okay, yeah, I skipped a couple. Sorry, peoples. Sorry. Sabrina C1 says, I only mentioned Radlib because you were speaking about future people you'd like to have. Oh, yeah, for Christian guests. Yes, Radlib is a, yeah, and I forgot Donovan's Christian too. Yeah, but Radlib's a very good call. I think, do I have him in my notes? Who do I have for? No, but I'm putting him down because that's a very good call because he's coming from the libertarian side. Yeah, I just need to make sure that it's not all, trad cats. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to Lambda about it too. But yes, very good call, Sabrina C1. Thank you. Radlib is now on my list and should have been anyway, for crying out loud. I'm embarrassed he wasn't. Okay. Dagbreaker says, how's it? How's it, sir? How can we have new terminologies, definitions without actually naming them? It seems that anything that is named is subvertible, like how black rage is now white rage. Let me read that again. How can we have new terminologies, definitions without actually naming them? Oh, I see. You like the idea of not naming them. Well, I think I see. Leaving aside who is named and how, you have to put names on things. And it's how you put names on. Like, think of the old idea that when you knew a demon's name, you would have power over it, which means name the demon and you have power. Or think of like Trump's thing where he was trying to get into office and he's saying, how can you address a problem if you can't even name it, right? Things are going to have to be named. But I think certainly the left has taught us that, they'll play any number of mealy-mouthed games trying to reframe something like vaccine hesitation. Oh my, I'm just hesitant to have my legs. Well, I'm not going in that direction. Anyway, never mind. Take the vaccines, listen to your local health authorities. There's nothing more effective than the vaccines. They're wonderful, and they're a gift from heaven to help us. So I will have no bad talk of vaccines. Things are going to have to be named, and it's in how you name them, you're creating the frame, and that frame brings to life, so to speak, a whole world of associations around it. And so we're going to have to figure out how to name things, and I think it's going to be unavoidable. However, I have thought in the past about the idea of leaving some things unnamed so it can't be subverted. And I think I talked about that actually in the first stream. I think in the first strategy stream. If I didn't mention it, I had thought about doing so. I think I did. Maybe I left it out. Anyway, we could go into that perhaps some other time. Thank you for the question. Doug Breker. Babyface Nielsen says, Semigog, there's no winning any culture or ideological battles. Truth is irrelevant now. The enemy's already strolled into possession of every tower, the castle, by invitation of the nobles. Well, that's one way to win. Or to at least fight a rearguard action or have some mitigating influence on the horrors that confront us. Just say that it's hopeless to do anything about it. Maybe it is. But if that's the approach you wish to take, then this exercise of developing a communication strategy is probably not going to be of interest to you. All right, 99 Iron Duke says, Semigog agreed. I constantly see leftists trying to infiltrate into the chat of channels that cover history, etc., etc. All too often, no one pushes back on them and gatekeeps. Yeah, well, that's the whole business with the, like, for example, how a virus moves into a cell. It mimics something that the cell is going to be receptive to. And they come in and just start doing their thing, which is like this whole business with Dungeons and Dragons right now. I know a ton of people on Twitter have just been like, why are you raging about this business with Dungeons and Dragons? Because, it's been paused forever since whatever edition. And I'm like, man, I grew up with first edition as a kid, and you just need dice and a pencil. And I'm like watching everyone tell me that even if I'm going to imagine another world and play this imaginary game with my friends, it's got to have blue-haired harridans and grievance moaning and every other kind of horror show involved with it. Black dildos being waved and rainbow flags and squawking. It's like nothing is safe from it. Nothing anywhere. So yeah, they just move into every territory and they convert the cell to generate other things besides what it's supposed to be doing. Lovely thing, lovely circumstances. So happy to be alive at this time. It's so filled with promise. It's so filled with opportunity. I can't tell you how pleasant and exciting it is to watch it all unfold around me. Yeah. So yeah, I feel you. I hear you. I feel you. Okay. Whoa, looks like other stuff appeared here. Just make sure I didn't miss anybody. 99 Iron Duke, down to the next one. Let's highlight Lambda again. Lambda's asking basically, thanks for the kind words. Do you know of any works of art, poems, plays, music, which promote the kind of thinking we want to encourage? Fewer and fewer. I do know that almost everything that you can see out there right now amounts to plays, music, and other works of art which promote the kind of thinking that we don't want to encourage, which shows you what happens when the whole thing's been sort of subverted. That's a good question. And it's actually a question that might usefully be addressed to Pharaoh, another person whose channel I want to recommend. Lambda, I know you're certainly familiar with him. Everybody check out Pharaoh's channel, F-E-R-R-O. Great stuff with art criticism, exploration of art, sculpture, painting, architecture, all this stuff through history. The trick, Lambda, I think, would be framing the question in the right way. Like basically, hey, Pharaoh, do a stream on contemporary art that's not degenerate, or that has some positive vision for the future. He's touched on it a little bit. Like he looked at different artistic themes and things from the mid-century period, the mid-century Italians, the mid-century Germans. And some of it was interesting and even, a little bit inspiring, particularly the Italian stuff, but a lot of it wasn't. And so it's almost like if you look at the non-degenerate art movements of the mid-century Germans and others, there's kind of got to ask yourself, did they get it right? It looks like in a lot of ways they didn't. But I think that's a Pharaoh question, and it'd be an interesting one to explore. It might even make for an episode, in terms of communication, because there's very much a theme of the elites underwriting the production of artwork that spreads their messages. And it's not just, with banks funding movies today or the rest. It goes all the way back to banks funding artists once upon a time, or paying to have churches erected or a fresco painted or all the rest. So let me just put a note down on those. I can't spell today. Idea of looking at art and artistic messages that tend to inculcate the kinds of people, or kinds of culture, or kinds of behavior that we'd like to see. Okay, good question, sir. Thank you. I wish I could answer it better rather than just run on at the mouth. Babyface Nielsen, like South Africa, America's prevaricating and delusion. Christian fanatics will be the death of her, neutralizing the right to bear arms advantage. I'm not sure what you're saying there, my friend. I tried to make sense of it. Let me read it one more time, not to be dismissive. Like South Africa, America's prevaricating and delusion. Christian fanatics will be the death of her, neutralizing the right to bear arms advantage. A, B, and C aren't adding up to my ABCs, my friend. I tried. King Salmonfish, semigod, because there are many races, slavery is illegal, and civil rights there are counterintuitive. Attack chances, because we care. Diff people in proximity, idea their comm strategy, what do they care about? I'm not really. Say it very simply for me. Just say it very, very simply for me. There's a whole bunch going on there, and I'm not able to get the thread on it. I wish I could. Try saying it more simply for me, and I'll do what I can. The exile, semigod, what lessons can be learned from how Israelites gained power and influence despite being a diaspora without a homeland? Can it be applied to our situation? Certainly many things about how, let's not call them Israelites, like Jewish people, how they've operated over the centuries, maintain their cultural identity in the face of often hostile environments, how they've maintained their in-group focus. There's a lot to be learned there. Likewise, there's a term for them. What do they call them? The whatever, out-group minority, or there's a term for it, and I wasn't aware of it before, but a bunch of people have looked into it. Kevin McDonald and others, and many, many others who are not even of his persuasion. What do they call them? The something minority. But it basically covers like Parsis and Armenians and Jews, Ismailis to a certain extent, like, people who focused on banking, who are minorities, focused on trade and the rest, and how they operate, how they maintain themselves. Yes, there are lessons there, and they can be applied. Elvacaro 555 says, Semigod, do you think we should adopt the subversive lefty tactic of naming things like Antifa so that when you say that you're not Antifa, you must be fat. Yeah, sure, that technique works. It's the whole basic thing of, do you still beat your wife? Yes or no? Yeah, that's a part of it. It's just sort of it's the slimiest bottom of it, but it still applies. And we shouldn't leave any tools lying unused on the table. Death by cognitive dissonance. As semigogs, should we have a more proactive response to the frame game, respond publicly with our own terminology, and hold our own linguistic ground? Or does that just put a target on our back? Yeah, definitely we should seize control of the narrative and take it. But in order to do that, we have to know how best to do that and what to insert as ours. And that hence is the thinking process I'm trying to go through here. But the short answer is yes. Now, this isn't a question, but I noticed that Denis Lambea, the going free dialectic right now, is producing the most visible results in white positive for newcomers and stuff. Yes, and I've followed Jason Kona. I've been a guest on his channel. He's a good guy. And as a matter, it's not out here, but I finally got going free. I'm going to review it once I've had a chance to do so. We'll see if I haven't contacted both of them yet. Well, I talked to Horse the Avenger, Tim Murdoch, but I'd like to get Jason Kona and Tim Murdoch on at the same time. Basically to talk to people who've been involved in this for a lot longer, and just to ask them basically what the best practices are. What do we know already? What work has already been done? And yeah, his going free stuff is something that immediately came to mind. So I hope to have him on for that. And I agree with you. All right. Whoa, it just refreshed again. Where am I? Okay, that's the America's Crazy. There's Exile, there's Self-Care. Okay, almost there. Okay, King Salmonfish says, point is that they are taking advantage of our good nature and what we care about. Can we reverse engineer this and discover a similar attack vector at what they care about? Do they care even? I think a strong argument can be made that they don't care about anything except power. I mean, that's fundamentally why we've been pinned into the position that we've for so long been in. Because everybody's like, well, if I have to do that, I won't do it because, the means is the end. And, I don't, that would be wrong. I think they're probably the actual king scumbaggery, the worst of them, the people who are really doing the bad things, they're not going to be shamed into a damn thing because it's ultimately a very cynical pursuit of power. However, there are lots of people who are along for the ride because it feels good, because it's presented to them as the thing that is morally right and just. So thanks for going to the trouble to explain. I think, yes, there are ways to target weaknesses or predispositions in people that we want to reach. However, it's probably going to be more the fence sitters, more the followers, and the rest, not the hawkers of scumbaggery that are at the fore with their worm tongue antics. Babyface Nielsen didn't have room to write, so recognizing that enemy is inside the gates, another tactic is needed. How can you possibly control the media and the narrative? If you can't, then choose differently. I can control the narrative by telling the best story. Memetics is all about finding a thing that is meaningful, that has been distilled, the shorter note has been written, so that it cannot be possibly said in a better way. And therefore people are going to repeat it almost verbatim, because if they don't, they won't say it perfectly, which means the punch is out of that feeling of having said something when they say it. You have to find the message, have it be on target, know what behavior you want it to introduce, and then say it perfectly. And the real media is a human being's mouth and another human being's ear. That medium, they can't shut it down. they can retard the progress of messages and the rest, and they can amplify in ways that are just have never been seen before. But I don't feel like the fight is fully lost. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm ridiculously optimistic. Maybe I'm gonna bite the dust and cough out my last in shame, metaphorically speaking, attempting to push this fight. Metaphorically speaking, I'm only talking about lawful and civil action, not actual violence. But I don't think so. I think there's hope. King Salmon Fish says, also my Peterson question directly relates to communication. You discussed previously the need for generating culture and a narrative vision as a part of the strategy. It outlines process. I've looked at some of Jordan Peterson's stuff. To be honest with you, I've seen enough of it that I don't, I'm probably not going to be reading his book anytime soon. I'm not sure. Generating culture can. Oh, that's in discussion with you're talking about discussion with Jolly Scholar 888, my friend Gerard. Yes, but yeah, I'll try to keep an open mind about him. I'm just people like him, people like James Lindsay, they serve a function. People like Sargon of Akkad, they serve a function. But I'm just, and they do bring people over, and they do not seem to be as much of a leap for people who are hesitant because of all the ways that people further right have been smeared. But yeah, I'll keep an open mind about it. Lovely Lady K. I'm gonna drink of water. Lovely Lady K says, what about the medium? I believe the targeted direct mail campaign could have considerable impact. I have access to some good mailing lists, Irish and Italian societies in Montreal. Yeah, direct mailing is something that's interesting. It's something that's interesting. But my experience with it is that it has a mythical 1% return rate. Now, that can be amplified considerably if you have a good mailing list, good leads, as they like to say. I think a lot could be done, actually, with direct mail. And you'd have your printing costs, and you'd have your postage. And somebody'd have to, lick a bunch of envelopes. Somebody'd have to design it and print it and the rest. But I think that's one of those, bricks and mortar approaches that could be very, very interesting and effective. But for that, your message damn sure better be well on target. And, it's your best. I can't imagine that you're going to get anything better than like a 5% response. So not only does your messaging need to be on target, you have to have some sense of what you want to do, what action you want them to take, like I was talking about earlier, upon receipt of the message. All right. Adrian Descent says, Descent? I don't even know how to pronounce that. Oh, wait, it just refreshed on me, damn it. There it is. Am I in the right spot? Yes, I am. Okay. Do you think the fetishization of tolerance and its subsequent corrosion of cultures, standards, and traditions can be countered? And if so, how? Well, I mean, you can, like, for example, tolerance, you reframe it as pathological altruism, or tolerance. I mean, the one of the ways that I've tried to tackle it is with the phrase, the only acceptable response to attack is suicide. So, I mean, yeah, there are ways to reframe it, but it's going to take some work, and it's got to be done right, because it's been so inculcated, the idea of being tolerant, but there are some things that you shouldn't tolerate. One of them is being attacked. So yeah, it depends on context. It depends on framing. Yes. That in particular is something that has to be addressed, that concept of tolerance. But I mean, a lot of this in terms of acceleration, and I want to use that term very carefully, because a lot of people think that acceleration is all about saying that you should go out and blow shit up or be an asshole and kill people or whatever, in order to bring about whatever it is. It's another anti-white lie. Acceleration is really, or accelerationism, as I understand it, and it certainly makes the most sense this way. Some people have said, I guess it comes out of Nick Land, I don't know. But as I understand it, it's simply recognizing that the path we're on is going to continue and get worse and worse and worse, faster and faster and faster, and it will come to a crisis point. It requires no action. Somebody put it really well. Maybe it was Arnold McIntyre. I can't remember. But the basic idea is that there's no agent in accelerationism. There's no action that you need to take other than to sit down and eat popcorn. It's literally a spectator sport. So yeah, that's what's going on with acceleration. Where did I just see this? I just saw something about acceleration. Why the hell did I just bring that up? I totally lost my train of thought. Man, it might be middleman minority. That might be it. Yes, that might be it. Thank you, Glow in the Dark. Yeah, where did the acceleration come up? I think I was answering a statement. Now I lost my train of thought. I'm retarded. I've been talking for almost 2 hours. And the worst thing is that this light that I have in front of my camera is like really bright. So I'm sort of like, I'll tell you, just turn it off. Yeah. So I lose my train of thought at times. Forgive me. Yeah. I know it's going to come back to me. I'm going to jump in here and be like, what is it about acceleration? I looked over at somebody else. Anyway, that was Adrian Descent. I think the fetishization of tolerance and the rest. God, I totally lost my train of thought. All right, it's going to be less embarrassing for me to just cut it clean and move on because I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Politea, Semigog, I don't think the tactic of naming things like Antifa doesn't work. Look at men's rights activists. The left just ignore. I don't think the tactic of naming things like Antifa doesn't work. Do you mean I don't think the tactic works, or do you think the tactic doesn't work? Because if you don't think it doesn't work, it means you think it does. Look at men's rights activists. Men's rights activists are a terrible example of anything. I mean, just first of all, to call it yourself a men's rights activist just sounds, I can't use that word on here, I'll be turned off. It sounds foolish. It's like, and then to call it MRA, it's terrible. No, it should be something straightforward. It's like, to example somebody brought up earlier of Jason Stuff and other people who pushed the term anti-white. Anti-white works. Nobody ignores that. Now it's spreading. And that's how it has to be. That, my friend, I would say, I think, is how it has to be. Okay, what's next? Babyface Nilsson. Nilsson. The enemy armies plus defectors are now 60. Oh man, is this just more black pill shit? The enemy armies plus defectors are now 60% of your population. The best possible outcome of winning a communication war is okay. Everybody has an opinion, man. All right, next one. Do you think a strategy on memetics would be good? This from someone who's got a runic name I can't read. Yes, all of this is about memetics fundamentally. It's all memetics. John Ski says, why does Chuck Schumer photos always have a celestial or godlike sunburst around his head? Picture taken looking up at him from below. They know how to use the memetics for their own side. Well, you answered your own question, and I would add to it all the pictures of Joe Biden that involve a circle behind his head. Yeah. Whoops. He just happened to be framed with a circle behind his head like a halo. It's just a whoops. Whoopsie whoops. King Salmonfish, I'm not talking about Peterson the man. I'm talking about a psychological description of the process of generating culture through creation of games and communication. We need a good game. Interesting. And I would address that to Jolly Scholar 888, King Salmonfish, because he seems to be the one most interested in the business of generating culture. It might also fit, and I guess this is why you're bringing it up, with the idea of having Pharaoh look at that and Lambda's question. Babyface Nilsson, I'm not saying the war is lost, but we can't fight over ground that was already lost by former generations and is now mined. I think we must choose battlefields very particularly. If you say so, I focus in communications. And I have never seen territory that can't be retaken. So I'll focus on where my expertise lies and where I might be able to do things effectively. If you've got some other area to focus on, feel free to share it. 99 Iron Duke says, Semigog, we need to support free association and the ability to choose who you allow into your group, club, or whatever. I agree 100%. That's something that needs to be looked at and is in fact a fundamental theme. I mean, that's kind of goes with the business of like what's already been figured out. Like you can see the whole business of white advocate or the idea of freedom of association. Somebody like Jared Taylor, who's thought about this for quite some time, has already sort of settled on those things as his focus. He's like, I'm a white advocate. I'm not anti anybody else. And I believe in freedom of association, right? Let us go our separate ways. Let's have a amicable divorce, right? Or Jason Koenig talking about anti-white this and that, right? So these are things that have been figured out thus far. And I certainly agree with you that this idea of freedom of association is a really fundamental thing. It's just like, you know, what the hell's going on? Are you going to force me to hang out with people? The sad thing is that right now, as it stands, they're like, yes, that's what we're going to do. We're going to force you to hang out with people, live in the pod, eat the bugs, and watch as we, well, I can't say such things. Watch as we unfurl different brightly colored flags around you and your children. El Vaquero 555 says, Semigog, one thing I've found is that outgrouping leftists really makes them lose their minds, even if they hate the group you're in. How would you use this when it comes to messaging the left? It's an interesting thought, just as a key thing. You know, there are a number of memes about it that I'm sure you've seen that, like, you know, you have to let us in, and then they're like, we'll make our space, and they're like, you have to let us in your space. Yeah, just thoughts on the fact that being excluded makes leftists go apeshit. Yeah, something to think about. There's something in there, isn't there? There's something in there. You know, it's almost like a troll. But a troll is basically another way of saying bait, right? So you get them to roll into a trap. So that is something to consider. All right. Damn. Did I miss anything? I think I missed one. Babyface Nielsen says, Semigog, sorry, I wasn't planning the black pill. No worries, my friend. And I didn't want to be like short with you. And I understand there are plenty of things to be black pilled about. So no problem. AD, Semigog, thoughts on what happened to Kobe? To Kobe? I thought it was about Soleimani or something. That is not related. Like, I will isolate. That is not related to our topic this evening. So I'm afraid that I'm going to have to skip over that question. Not to mention, it's also convenient because I don't understand it. Next question. This one is from Luis Clarizio. In line with Israel question, are there things we can use from the Cuba Revolution? I'm not a good one to ask about that. There probably are in terms of how things were framed and how it was set up. You know, you can take a look at the Russian Revolution, the Bela Kun stuff in Hungary. You can look at whatever the abortive revolution was in the 20s or 1920, whenever it was in Germany, Cuba, many of these places. You can look and see what your enemy is using. I mean, in a competitor. You can also, for example, you know, it's like the pull out the Saul Alinsky. I mean, I tend to think probably that most of what you'd find that was done in Cuba in terms of communication subversion strategy, you can probably find in distilled form with Alinsky. But unfortunately, I'm not knowledgeable enough about Cuba, certainly, and certainly not the revolution there and the events, to abstract what those things are that could be learned. Well, now, I think we have come to the end. I'm at 53 minutes in. I guess it won't stop me. I'll give it just a second to see if there are any last questions. But first off, I want to, I didn't show my books. Buy my science fiction book. You can get this on Amazon. This is the dystopian tale set in a dark future in Istanbul in the year 2076. And it is about a book thief who's been tasked with tracking down a book that just happens to have 2 legs. And in the course of it, he gets mixed up in international corporations that have sent hitmen after him and an esoteric set of Shiite assassins and all kinds of other things. You can find this on Amazon as Vinculum. It's under Oliver Perrin. Just something to, pass the time. And there is Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. This is my collection of poems. You can find this on Amazon as well, but it's under the name Oliver Timkenparent, my middle name, my German middle name. My German name is Sarah. Yes, and please do follow this channel, Semigog, as well as the Safer Space, and you can do that on Odyssey. Well, Safer Space isn't on Odyssey, but the two channels are on BitChute. They're here. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Telegram. Please, people, go over to Odyssey and sign up over there, because I could be booted off of here tomorrow. Seriously, tomorrow it could happen. Let's see. Do we have any last questions? Oh, and prayers for my dear friend Tim. I hope to have him back soon. So offer them up. And hopefully he will be back soon. I really do hope he will be back soon. Do we have any last questions? I'm checking. Oh, looks like we had a last few. I'm not answering John Ski's last question. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Be kind, civil, and lawful in all ways. Zed says, I need a link tree. I do need to I need to do that. He says, does the book include cats? No, there are no cats in the book. Herman Hoff, thanks for the kind words. Okay, details about Shadle and it, and I didn't know. Ally good, competitor bad from Politea. Yes, that is the Schmittian friend-enemy distinction. El Vaquero 555. Semigog, since the Boy Scouts are fecht. Aye, the Boy Scouts are fecht, laddie. What do you think about starting a male-only organization that teaches males how to be masculine to generate culture, hunt, fish, work on cars, etc.? I think it's great, except you'd immediately get called a cult. I think it would be better to go over and basically take over Boy Scouts so that you could move under its skin rather than being, get called the new mid-century German youth organization, which, certainly would be what would happen. Yes, ally good, competitor bad. Absolutely. I mean, at worst, you call them opponents, but yeah, competitor. Allies good, competitors bad. Yeah, Adrian Dasant throws in a last little bit of McLuhan. The medium is the message. Yes, of course. And I'm supposed to look at Psyche Jiu-Jitsu on Twitter. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I guess I will. Oh, one last one from King Salmonfish, and then I will get out of here because I'm going to try to get out under 2 hours. I'm always going like 4 seconds over 2 hours and like screwing the whole thing of like trying to get out under so that it will auto load to Odyssey and save me the trouble. King Salmonfish says, last question. Do you believe cultural illusion? Do you believe openly denying the very existence of various cultural illusions is an effective communication strategy for getting others to stand up, refuting falsity and contradictions? Yes, but you have to remember the dialectical. It can be, but you have to remember the dialectical thing, which is that sometimes it's like if you push against somebody harder, he's likely to push harder against you. So there are certain ways. It's like if somebody's shoving against you, sometimes it's better to simply move like this and let them go falling. So yeah, you're going to, every action has an equal and opposite reaction kind of thing. So yeah, it can be, but there's no universalism. Any rule that you try to establish has its exceptions. So yeah, in some cases it can be. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all very, very much for joining me. I will be back for more stuff. It looks like the one that will be on programmers, talking about how they think and some other very, very interesting things in that respect. It looks like it's finally about to go because the guy I was waiting on that I really wanted to get as well is here. So I'm going to be reaching out to various programmers and getting them set up as a group. And there are probably going to be a bunch of them that are little NRX firebrands as well. So we'll see how all of that goes. Ladies and gentlemen, one and all, you are fine peoples. I thank you for being here. Hopefully you will join me next time. Follow me on all these other platforms. I love you. I love you one and all. Thank you very much. And now it's time for me to say, Semigog out.